Time permitting, we will do a second round of questions, but we really want to kind of keep this, close this at 8:30 just so everyone can get about their business. So, Mr. Jackson, what is your opinion of the 10th Amendment as it applies to nullification and state sovereignty? 2 minutes, please.
Well, my opinion is the same as that of James Madison. James Madison talked about this in Federalist Paper number 46. He anticipated the possibility that the federal government would engage in a kind of what he called madness. And he gave 4 things that the states should do, and these amount to nullification. So number 1, the chief executive should stand up against it, should seek to implement policies that oppose it. He said, number 2, the General Assembly or legislature should pass laws that contradict what the federal government is trying to do. He said, number 3, that the states should band together in order to provide a bulwark against over-encroaching federal power. And then number 4 is for you all. He said the people should express their disquietude and repugnance. So it's time for some disquietude and repugnance, folks. So yes, we have got to reassert the power of the 10th Amendment. It is not a radical, crazy, right-wing idea. It is a constitutional principle that the Founding Fathers put in place in order to limit the power of the federal government to take away our freedom. Now, if that's radical, then we've all gone mad. So we've got to begin to do that. I pledge my voice, my vote, and my very being, if necessary, in civil disobedience against laws such as Obamacare, for example, that violate the principle of the 10th Amendment. And frankly, I do not believe, and look, I'm a graduate of Harvard Law School, folks. I practiced law 15 years. I still don't believe that the Supreme Court was intended to be the final arbiter of what is constitutional. I think that we, as the state of Virginia, and every state has something to say about that.
Jackson again, my apologies.
I was just going to ask if you could go from that end to this end next time, so I can be before EW. So that would be outstanding. Thank you. I think that EW has done a terrific job of framing all of this, and what I'd like to do is to give you some examples of where I think the Commonwealth of Virginia and many other states have said to the federal government, well, you might think that's a great idea, but we're not going to comply with it. And oftentimes, what the federal government likes to do is tie funding to things to kind of dangle that carrot to states. And I'll tell you one of the areas that I'm really proud, actually, that Governor McDonald stood strong and said no way, was Race to the Top. The Race to the Top grant program is actually billions of dollars of our taxpayer dollars that the president has had in hand to redistribute. If you think redistribution between individuals is bad, you should see the redistribution of funds between states. That's even worse. So billions of dollars to Race to the Top, and in order to apply for that grant program, Race to the Top, you had to agree that you would accept Common Core standards. So I talked with the governor about that when he was elected. Governor Kane was heading in that direction, and we both agreed that that was not what he wanted for Virginia, so he didn't apply for those dollars. And because he couldn't, because he didn't agree that that was the right way to go, our tax dollars that we worked so hard to contribute to the federal government were redistributed. Most of those dollars went to states with Democrat leaders, and in the early education part of Race to the Top, they distributed 10 grants, 9 to states with Democrat governors, 1 to a state with a Republican governor. So that's what's going on in Washington. The other one I like to talk about is the national ID. Virginia said, no, we're not going to do that. It's too costly. If you guys think that's a great idea, you find some way to come up with a federal ID. We're not going to use our driver's licenses for it. And so Virginia said no, and we've not complied with that. If they feel so strongly about it, they can have everyone get a passport, I suppose, but we're not going to use Virginia's driver's license for that, so Virginia has said no to that also. The healthcare exchanges, I don't think a single Republican governor should agree to put a health exchange into their state. Let the feds figure out how to do it. They don't have the money or the wherewithal, and I think that if the Republican governors, all 30 of them, which is 60% of the states, say, we're not doing the health exchange, I can tell you there's not enough money or wherewithal in the federal government to be able to do it for us, and that will implode Obamacare from the inside out. So those are just some of the areas where I think we're already saying no. and not complying in Virginia.
Well, I will be very brief because I'm not Pete and I can't speak for him directly. But I will say this much. He's already, we've talked about this, and one of the things he told me is that he agrees with our current Attorney General, Ken Cuccinelli, who says that we should use every possible legal means available to us to oppose federal overreach. I think that's a good strategy. I think it's one that should be pursued. We believe in the rule of law, we believe in order, and that should be followed up. That's all I'll say.
Thank you. Martin.
Pete needs to send you out here more often. Let me say, I'm not going to get, I would just say ditto to what Bishop Jackson said a little while ago, but very specifically on the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment says that which is written here, that's it, that's the powers you have, and everything else is reserved to the states and the people. And throughout the years, I've had a record of fighting and standing up for that. I'm the senior state chairman of the 50 states, working with an organization that specifically exists for state rights, the American Legislative Exchange Council. I am the one that wrote the Healthcare Freedom Act, the two sentences that became the Healthcare Freedom Act that pushed back there. Back in the early 90s, I worked on a task force to fight against Hillary Care. We did so successful, and out of that task force we published a book called Keeping the Promise. In the mid-90s, I was on the federalism task force that George Allen put together that pushed back against federal expansion and overstep. And then on the expansion of Medicaid just a matter of weeks ago, I voted against that and made the very arguments on the floor of the Senate that Kate Oldenshank made just a little while ago, which was regard to whether or not the federal government, any of those things, they'd ever been able to live up to that. So, no question, we need to push back. I support nullification. As a matter of fact, that's the reason why I was willing to put that language in that I said became the Healthcare Freedom Act, because no matter what the federal government did, I wanted to let them know that here in the state of Virginia, you couldn't force someone to purchase, nor could you penalize them if they did not.
Well, as we say when we're in session, and we're going to go back tomorrow, and I'm going to vote against the governor's transportation plan, just all his amendments, just like I voted against the plan to begin with, and the budget as well. Anybody thinks they're going to expand Obamacare in Virginia is nuts. We're not going to do it, and that's why I voted against it. As the old saying goes, it's all been said, but it hadn't been said by all of us. So let me just say that why is it that people seem to forget that the states created the federal government? The federal government did not create that. I remember that. 2 years ago, before it was popular, I authored a letter and had every single member of the House of Delegates sign on to it in 2010. I think some of you may have participated with me in this, declaring that Virginia was saying to our congressional delegation to keep your mitts off the 10th Amendment. And we actually carried that letter to the Congress and delivered it directly to all 11 members and the 2 senators. This year I carried a resolution, once again reaffirming the 10th Amendment. Folks, I don't know what to say to you. I wish I could tell you what we can do. But I know what I'm going to do. If you nominate me to be Lieutenant Governor, and I get elected, I am going to be absolutely clear every chance I get to push back on the federal government. Because I'm going to tell you something. If you don't push back, you're going to get pushed down. And don't you forget it.
Here's where you can differentiate. Here's where you can make your decision on who you're going to choose to be the Republican nominee for Lieutenant Governor. Who is the person that is going to have the courage to actually lead and do what they say and affirm that the Republican creed says? You see, our creed talks about limiting government. Republicans are doing the opposite. So we can talk about pushing back on the healthcare exchanges. We can talk about pushing back on Obamacare. But we as Republicans have allowed this now to be put on the table and to be expanded. So the Lieutenant Governor, is it just going to be a tie-breaking vote, 20 to 20? Or is it going to be a person in that position who will use the leverage of that tie-breaking vote to fight for, to defend, and move the ball forward on conservative principles that preserve and expand our liberty? I have a record of doing this in Stafford County, one of the largest counties in the Commonwealth. Cutting taxes, cutting the size of government, cutting the actual government, limiting government so that freedom stays in your hands. And it is about states' rights, but it is also about being willing to push back, to fight, and actually follow through on it. And that's what I'll do.
Well, I think there's no office where you have more of an opportunity to push back on the federal government than the Attorney General, and Ken Cuccinelli has demonstrated that courageously time and time again. How I know all of us have cheered him on as the mainstream media, the establishment, even establishment Republicans have scorned his attempts at times, saying, oh, he's going too far, he's picking fights too often. Look, the Attorney General has to pick fights with the federal government because it's the federal government's goal to just ram right over them. And we have to have an Attorney General who is used to standing up all alone saying, no way, not this time. On the transportation bill, Mark was one of the very first to come out and say, forget it. There wasn't a lot of hemming and hawing. Oh, I'm going to listen. Maybe there's something different here that we haven't. No, it was, no, we're not going to raise taxes. We're not going to do this. I think one of the areas, so that's just to point out Mark's courage and his willingness to take the tough stands from the very beginning, not weighing the political costs. I think one area where we're going to have to be particularly vigilant coming up, of course, healthcare, of course, the healthcare exchanges, which are disastrous. They will bankrupt Virginia and every other state. The right to work laws, they're going to be attacked, but particularly our Second Amendment rights. The federal government is definitely coming after our guns. They're coming after our ammunition. They're going to do it in roundabout ways. They're starting off with the background checks for private sales. I mean, it will involve passing them down to your son and grandchild, where they're going to have the federal government intrude itself on ammunition sales. So that is one area where we're going to have to fight. We're going to have to fight hard. You've got Connecticut basically saying yesterday and today that they're going to have draconian laws, and that's only going to spur the federal government on. So I think we need somebody who has shown they're not going to sit back and see what the federal government has in store next, but they're going to be willing to stand up and articulate our conservative values, but particularly the core tenets of the Constitution, because that is what this is all about. Thank you.
Rob Bell doesn't just talk about 10th Amendment remedies, he puts them into action, he votes for them, and as Attorney General, he will continue fighting the federal government using the 10th Amendment as the central tool in our state's toolbox. And I'd like to echo a lot of what Kate said. The next big battle is going to be over our guns. They are coming for our guns, they are coming for our Second Amendment rights, and everybody here understands that these so-called universal background checks are not about background checks, it's about registration, and we don't want it here. Bottom line. 1791, when the Bill of Rights was being ratified 2 years after the Constitution, originally there were 8 amendments dealing with specific abuses we had suffered at the hands of the British. The 9th and the 10th Amendments were added on at the very end as a protection against unknown forms of tyranny. And this is not about cyclical disagreements. This is about wholesale infringements on our liberty. This is the moment the Founding Fathers were frightened about. This is why they added the 10th Amendment in. This is the time for the states to stand up and say, no more, not 1 inch further, and we need an Attorney General who is going to do exactly that. You know, there are some folks that want to use the 10th Amendment as a paring knife to cut out slight bits of unconstitutionality from some of these bills, such as the mandate from the Obamacare bill. No, absolutely not. Rob wants to use it as a broadsword. The entire bill must be killed, and the 10th Amendment is the way to do it. The Amendment is also going to be critical in the other fights we face, from our gun rights to our right to work. If you look down some areas in Southwest Virginia, there is a war on coal going on right now. The federal government is killing third, fourth, fifth generation mine towns, putting them all on food stamps, taking away their jobs. Where in the Constitution does it give them the right to do that? The 10th Amendment is going to cover so many other things. There are folks in the federal government that want to take away our soda and salt. These people will never be satisfied until they plan every bit of our lives, and the 10th Amendment is how we stop it. We need an Attorney General to do exactly that.
Well, folks, I think this is the first meeting we've ever had where we actually are within 10 minutes of being on schedule. So I would like to thank all the candidates for